Back in October 2017, out near the Cascades in eastern Washington, my partner Jim and I were working as forest rangers in the dryland wilderness. We'd both been doing that job for years, me for 12, him for 8, and we thought we knew every corner of those woods. Our station sat 15 miles from the nearest town, connected by a gravel road that washed out every spring. Cell service was bad, radio was worse. Most days it was just us, checking trails, logging reports, watching for fires. The autumn that year came early, cold and dry, with pine needles thick on the ground. One afternoon in early October, we found something we couldn't explain. A village hidden deep in a valley we'd never noticed before. And the things living there weren't human. We documented everything. We took photos, videos, measurements, and we have proof of a Bigfoot tribe living in those woods. But we'll never share it, because when we learned why they stay hidden, we understood that showing the world would be signing their death warrant. I thought the hardest part would be keeping the secret. It wasn't. The hardest part was realizing what that secret said about us. It started on a Tuesday, October 3rd. Jim and I were doing a routine perimeter check along the old logging road that dead-ended into federal wilderness. The air smelled like dry pine and distant smoke from a controlled burn 2 valleys over. Everything felt normal until we reached the clearing where the trail split toward the drainage basin. Jim stopped walking first. He pointed at the ground without saying anything. There, in the soft dirt, were footprints, not deer, not elk, not bear. They were shaped like human feet, but wider, deeper, with toes that spread like someone walking barefoot. Each print was maybe 17 inches long, pressed into the soil like someone had walked through while the ground was wet. The stride length was enormous, at least 4 feet between steps. I crouched down, ran my hand along the edge of the nearest print. The ridge of the heel was clean, the toes distinct and separate. Jim pulled out his phone, took photos from multiple angles. We didn't speak for a long time. We both knew what we were looking at, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Finally, Jim broke the silence. "We need to follow these." I nodded. We marked the location on the GPS and started tracking. The prints led us deeper into the forest, away from any established trail, into terrain we'd never explored. The trees grew denser, the canopy thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight. The forest floor was covered in pine needles and moss, which made the prints harder to follow, but every 20 or 30 feet we'd find another one, perfectly preserved in a patch of exposed dirt. We walked for almost an hour, climbing over fallen logs, pushing through underbrush. The air grew colder, heavier. Then the forest opened up into a narrow valley, tucked between 2 ridges, completely hidden from above. And that's when we saw it. The village. At first, we didn't understand what we were looking at. The structures blended so perfectly with the landscape that they seemed almost natural. But as we got closer, the intentionality became clear. There were lean-tos made from woven branches, stacked in intricate patterns that would shed rain, to stone circles arranged in perfect spirals, raised platforms built into the trees, accessible by notched logs that served as ladders. Everything was constructed from natural materials. No metal, no plastic, nothing manufactured. But the craftsmanship was undeniable. This wasn't random. This wasn't animals making nests. This was architecture. Jim pulled out his camera and started filming. I did the same with my phone. We moved slowly through the village, documenting everything. There were at least 15 structures spread across the valley floor, each one carefully positioned near water sources or natural shelter. Some looked old, weathered by years of rain and wind. Others looked recent, the wood still green. Near the center of the village, we found a large communal area. There was a fire pit lined with river stones, the ashes cold but not ancient. Around the pit were woven baskets, dozens of them, in various sizes. They were filled with dried berries, nuts, roots, and what looked like dried fish. The weaving was tight and precise, better than anything I'd seen at craft fairs. Jim picked one up, examined it closely. "This is incredible," he whispered. "This is human-level craftsmanship." But we both knew humans hadn't built this. The scale was wrong. The doorways to the lean-tos were too tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet. The platforms in the trees were positioned too high for any person to access comfortably. And then there was the smell. It hit us as we explored deeper, a thick, musky odor like wet fur and earth, heavy in the air. Not unpleasant exactly, but unmistakably animal. We found more prints around the village, some fresh, some old. Different sizes, adults and juveniles if I had to guess. A family group, maybe more than one. We spent 3 hours documenting everything, taking hundreds of photos and videos. Neither of us said the word Bigfoot, but we were both thinking it. When we finally left the valley, the sun was setting. We hiked back to the station in silence, both of us processing what we'd found. That night, we sat in the station and went through the footage. The evidence was overwhelming. The structures, the baskets, the footprints. Everything pointed to one impossible conclusion. There was an intelligent, non-human population living in those woods, and they'd been there for a long time. Jim leaned back in his chair, rubbed his face. "We have to report this," he said. I nodded. "But to who? And say what?" We talked for hours, going in circles. If we went to the sheriff, he'd think we were crazy. If we went to the Forestry Service, they'd want to investigate, bring in teams, turn the valley into a research site. If we went public, the media would swarm the area within days. Every option felt wrong. Finally, around midnight, Jim said something that changed everything. "What if they don't want to be found?" I looked at him. He continued. "Think about it. They're this close to human civilization, and we've never seen them, not once in 12 years. They've stayed completely hidden. That's not luck. That's intentional." He was right. The valley was only 6 miles from our station. If the Bigfoot, and we were calling them that now because what else could they be? If they wanted contact, they'd had plenty of opportunities. Instead, they'd built their village in the most concealed location possible, surrounded by dense forest, invisible from the air, far from any trail. They were hiding. The question was, why? We decided to go back, not to report it, not yet, but to understand. We needed to know more before we made any decisions. The next morning, we packed cameras, notebooks, measuring equipment, and enough supplies for a full day. We told the station we were doing an extended perimeter survey. It wasn't a lie exactly. We hiked back to the valley, moving carefully, trying not to disturb anything. When we arrived, the village was quiet, empty, but we could feel the presence of something watching. The hairs on my neck stood up. Jim felt it too. We split up to cover more ground. I took the eastern side of the village, he took the west. I found more evidence of habitation, tool marks on trees, caches of food stored in elevated platforms, even what looked like children's toys, carved wooden figures, polished smooth by handling. And then I found the drawings. They were on the rock face at the far end of the valley, sheltered under a natural overhang. Pictographs made with what looked like charcoal and clay-based pigments. The images were simple but clear. Figures, tall, broad-shouldered figures that could only be Bigfoot, and smaller figures, clearly human. The drawings told a story. In the first panel, the two groups coexisted peacefully, Bigfoot and humans side by side. In the second panel, the humans held weapons, rifles unmistakably. In the third panel, the Bigfoot were running, fleeing into the trees. And in the final panel, the Bigfoot were alone, hidden, watching the humans from a distance. I stood there, staring at those drawings, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just a village. This was a refuge. They weren't hiding because they were dangerous. They were hiding because they'd been hunted. I called Jim over. He came quickly, saw the drawings, and went silent. We took photos, lots of them, making sure to capture every detail. "How old do you think these are?" Jim asked. I shook my head. "Could be decades, could be 100 years, but the message is clear." Jim traced his finger along the image of the human with the rifle. "They remember," he said quietly. "They know what we did to them." We spent the rest of the day searching for more evidence. We found it everywhere, hidden trails that led away from the valley, escape routes carefully maintained, lookout posts built high in the trees, positioned to watch the approaches, storage caches buried under rocks, preservable food kept in case they needed to flee quickly. This entire village was designed with one purpose: survival. Survival from us. That night, back at the station, we researched everything we could find about Bigfoot sightings, historical accounts, indigenous stories. What we found was disturbing. Hundreds of reports over the centuries. And in almost every modern account, the human response was the same: hunting parties, armed expeditions, people trying to capture or kill the creature for proof. We found forum posts from just last year, people bragging about going into these exact woods with rifles, night vision equipment, trail cameras. Looking for Bigfoot, they'd written. Going to bag me a monster. Jim looked at me across the table. "If we tell anyone about the village, this is what happens. They'll come with guns." I knew he was right. And that's when we made the decision. We wouldn't report it. Not to anyone. But we couldn't just walk away either. We needed to understand more. Over the next 2 weeks, we visited the valley 6 more times. We never saw the Bigfoot directly, but we saw evidence of them constantly. Fresh footprints, newly woven baskets, smoke from fires that were extinguished before we arrived. They knew we were coming. They were watching us, staying just out of sight. Jim started leaving things: small gifts, apples from his lunch, a pocket knife, a wool blanket. The next day, the items would be gone, and in their place would be something else. Woven grass, carved wood, just stones stacked in careful patterns. It was communication. Tentative, cautious, but real. We started to understand the rhythms of the village. The Bigfoot were most active at dawn and dusk. They avoided the middle of the day, when hikers were most likely to pass through the area. They used the creek as a highway, walking in the water to avoid leaving prints. They were careful, intelligent, and deeply, deeply afraid. One afternoon, I found something that made everything even more clear. It was a pit, hidden under brush at the edge of the valley. Inside were the remains of trail cameras, at least a dozen of them, smashed and broken. I recognized some of the brands, expensive equipment, the kind hunters use. The Bigfoot had found them, destroyed them, and buried them. They knew they were being watched. They knew people were looking for them. And they were fighting back the only way they could, by staying invisible. I showed Jim. He photographed the pit, documented every camera. "They're not just hiding," he said. "They're actively evading. They know about our technology." That's when I realized how intelligent they really were. They understood cameras. They understood that humans use tools to track and hunt. They'd adapted their entire way of life around avoiding detection. This wasn't primitive. This was sophisticated survival strategy. We started finding more evidence of their awareness. Sections of the forest where branches had been arranged to block sightlines from nearby trails. Areas where they deliberately covered their tracks, sweeping the ground with pine branches. Even what looked like false trails, prints that led nowhere, designed to mislead. They were protecting themselves, protecting their families. And they were doing it because they'd learned, probably over generations, that humans were the most dangerous predators in the forest. That night, Jim and I sat on the porch of the station. The woods were quiet, the stars bright overhead. "We can't ever tell anyone," Jim said. "If this gets out, if people know there's a whole tribe living 6 miles from here, they'll be hunted to extinction within a year." I agreed. We'd found something incredible, something that would rewrite our understanding of the natural world, and we were going to bury it, because the alternative was genocide. 3 weeks after we found the village, we finally saw them. We'd set up a remote camera in a tree, positioned to overlook the communal area, activated by motion. We checked it every few days. Most of the footage was birds, deer, the occasional coyote. But on October 27th, the camera caught something else. The footage was grainy, shot in low light just before dawn. A figure emerged from one of the larger structures. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown fur. The body structure was humanoid, broad shoulders, long arms, bipedal stance. But the proportions were different. The arms were longer, the torso thicker, the head larger and more conical. It moved with purpose, walking upright to the fire pit. A moment later, 2 more figures appeared. One was smaller, maybe 6 feet tall. A juvenile, we guessed. The third was similar in size to the first, carrying something in its arms. Baskets. They were gathering supplies, moving them from one structure to another. We watched the footage over and over. The way they moved was fluid, coordinated. They communicated with each other using low vocalizations and hand gestures. At one point, the juvenile touched the adult's arm, and the adult responded by placing a hand on the juvenile's head, a gesture of obvious affection. "They're a family," Jim whispered. We kept watching. The footage ran for 11 minutes before the Bigfoot retreated back into the structures. In that time, we saw them organize food, repair a basket, and interact with a gentleness that was unmistakably caring. These weren't monsters. These weren't dangerous creatures. They were people. Different from us, yes, but people nonetheless. And we were the ones they feared. Jim copied the footage to 3 separate drives. We locked them in the station safe. "No one can ever see this," he said. I nodded. But part of me wanted the world to know. Wanted people to understand that Bigfoot wasn't a monster from campfire stories. That they were intelligent, peaceful, just trying to survive. Jim saw the conflict in my face. "If you release that footage, what do you think happens? Scientific teams? Maybe, for a week. Then the hunters show up, the cryptozoologists, the people who want a body for proof, the people who see them as a trophy. You know I'm right." I did. I'd seen the forums, the YouTube channels, the TV shows. Finding Bigfoot meant killing Bigfoot to most people. It meant proof, a body, evidence that could be studied and displayed. It meant the end of their secrecy, and secrecy was the only thing keeping them alive. We went back to the valley the next day. We needed to see them in person, not through a camera. Now we hiked in quietly, carefully, and positioned ourselves downwind near the tree line. And we waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then began to fall. Just when we were about to give up, they appeared. 3 of them moving through the village with quiet confidence. The largest one, the one we'd seen in the footage, was carrying an armload of branches. The juvenile was beside it, mimicking its movements. The third hung back, watchful, scanning the perimeter. And then it looked directly at us. We froze. We were at least 100 yards away, hidden in shadow and brush, but it saw us. Its eyes locked onto ours, and for a moment, the world stopped. The creature didn't react with fear or aggression. It simply watched, studying us. Then it made a low sound, a rumbling vocalization that carried across the valley. So the other 2 stopped immediately, turned toward us. We didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, exposed, waiting to see what would happen. The largest one set down the branches and started walking toward us. Slowly, deliberately. Jim grabbed my arm, but I shook my head. "Don't run," I whispered. "Just wait." The Bigfoot came within 50 feet and stopped. It stood there, massive and imposing, but not threatening. Up close, I could see details the camera had missed. The fur was coarse and thick, reddish-brown with gray around the face. The eyes were dark, deeply set and unmistakably intelligent. The hands were huge, with long fingers and opposable thumbs. It tilted its head, studying us the same way we were studying it. And then it did something I'll never forget. It raised one hand, palm out, and held it there. A gesture. Not aggression, not fear, recognition. I raised my hand in return, slowly, mirroring the gesture. We stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then the Bigfoot lowered its hand, turned, and walked back to the others. They gathered together briefly, exchanged vocalizations, and disappeared into the forest without looking back. Jim and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "It knew we weren't a threat?" I nodded. "It was giving us a chance to prove we were different." We hiked back to the station as the sun set. That night, we talked for hours about what we'd witnessed. The Bigfoot had allowed us to see them, had acknowledged our presence. It was an act of incredible trust, or maybe incredible risk. Either way, it meant something. It meant they were willing to believe that not all humans were hunters. And that made our responsibility even greater. We couldn't betray that trust. We spent the next week analyzing everything we documented: the drawings on the rock face, the destroyed trail cameras, the escape routes, the lookout posts. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The Bigfoot tribe had survived by staying hidden, and they stayed hidden because they knew what humans did to things they didn't understand. We hunted them, we killed them. We turned them into legends and monsters so we could justify our fear. And now, in 2017, with technology everywhere, with drones and cameras and GPS, their survival was more precarious than ever. We were sitting on proof that would make us famous, proof that would answer one of the world's greatest mysteries. And we were going to bury it, because fame wasn't worth extinction. On November 5th, we went back to the valley one last time. We brought something with us, a sign. We'd made it ourselves, carved into a piece of driftwood with a burning tool. It was simple, just two symbols. A human figure and a Bigfoot figure, side by side, and beneath them, a circle with a line through it. No hunting. We placed it at the entrance to the valley, positioned so anyone approaching would see it. Then we built a cairn around it, stacking stones to make it permanent. It was a message, not for the Bigfoot, for the humans who might come looking. We knew it wouldn't stop everyone, but maybe it would stop someone. Maybe it would make one hunter think twice. After we finished, we walked into the village one last time. It was empty as usual, but we could feel them watching. I set down a notebook wrapped in waterproof plastic. Inside, I'd written a letter. I don't know if they could read English, but I wrote it anyway. It said, "We know you're here. We know why you hide. We won't tell anyone. You're safe from us. I'm sorry for what my people have done. I'm sorry you have to live in fear. You deserve better." I left the notebook in the center of the communal area, weighted down with a stone. Then Jim and I walked out of the valley for the last time. 2 days later, we checked the remote camera one final time before removing it. There was new footage. It showed one of the Bigfoot approaching the notebook. The creature picked it up, opened it, and studied the pages for several minutes. Then it carefully rewrapped the notebook, placed it inside one of the structures, and walked away. They'd kept it. Whether they understood the words or not, they'd recognized the gesture, and they'd accepted it. We deleted the footage from the camera and removed it from the tree. We took down all our equipment, erased any trace of our presence. Then we went back to the station and filed a report stating that the perimeter survey had found nothing unusual, just routine forest activity, no anomalies. Jim transferred to a different station 6 months later, not because of what we'd found, but because staying was too hard. Every day, knowing they were out there, knowing we couldn't talk about it, it wore on him. I understood. I stayed for another year, then requested a desk position. I told people it was for better hours, less physical strain. That was partly true, but the real reason was the weight of the secret. It was heavy, heavier than I'd expected. Some nights, I'd lie awake thinking about the village, wondering if they were okay, if they'd stayed safe, if hunters had found them. I'd check the local news obsessively, looking for reports of unusual sightings or disappearances. Nothing ever came up. They were still hidden, still safe. I hope they still are. Years later, I started to understand the full scope of what we'd found. I did research quietly in my spare time. I discovered that indigenous tribes across the Pacific Northwest had stories about the Tall Ones, or the forest people, going back hundreds of years. In every story, the same themes appeared. They were peaceful, they avoided humans, and they were hunted. The Lummi Nation had a name for them, Tsemekwes. The Salish called them Cascades. The Quinault told stories of giants who lived in the high valleys and came down only at night. Cheyenne, in every account, the beings eventually disappeared, driven deeper into the wilderness by human expansion. Our Bigfoot tribe wasn't an anomaly. They were survivors. The last remnant of a population that had once been widespread, now reduced to hiding in the most remote corners of the continent. And they'd learned over generations that humans were the greatest threat to their existence. I found historical records too. Newspaper articles from the 1800s about ape men shot by settlers. Wanted posters offering rewards for wild man corpses. Accounts of hunting parties that went into the woods specifically to kill whatever was leaving the large footprints. We'd been hunting them for centuries, and we wondered why they stayed hidden. The reason wasn't terrifying because of what the Bigfoot were. It was terrifying because of what it said about us. They stayed hidden because we'd proven again and again that we couldn't coexist with anything we didn't understand. We destroyed it. We killed it. We turned it into a trophy or a specimen. The Bigfoot tribe knew this. They'd seen it. They'd experienced it. And they'd made the choice to vanish rather than face extinction. That was the truth we'd uncovered in that valley. Not just that Bigfoot existed, but that they existed in fear. Fear of us. I wanted to tell people. I wanted to show them the footage, the photos, the evidence we'd collected. I wanted to say, look, they're real, they're intelligent, they're peaceful, and we're the reason they have to hide. But I knew what would happen. The moment the proof went public, the valley would be overrun. Researchers would come first. I with good intentions, wanting to study and protect, but they'd be followed by others. Hunters wanting trophies, collectors wanting bodies, media turning it into a spectacle. And in the chaos, the Bigfoot would either be captured, killed, or driven so deep into hiding they'd never be found again. The only way to protect them was silence. So that's what I chose. Jim and I both did. We buried the evidence, destroyed most of the footage, and locked away what remained. We made a pact never to speak about it publicly, and we kept that pact until now. I'm writing this down because I'm getting older, and the weight of the secret is something I don't want to carry alone anymore. Jim passed away last year. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. At his funeral, his wife pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from Jim, written years ago, meant to be delivered after his death. It said, "You were right to keep the secret, but make sure someone knows the truth eventually. They deserve to be remembered, even if they can't be known." So this is me, honoring that request. I'm not releasing the footage, I'm not giving locations or detailed maps, but I am telling the story, because people need to understand what we found and why it matters. In October 2017, in a hidden valley in the Cascade dryland wilderness, my partner and I discovered a Bigfoot tribe. We documented their village, their tools, their art, their family structures. We saw them with our own eyes. We have proof, and we're never sharing it. Not because we want glory for ourselves, not because we doubt what we saw, but because sharing it would be a death sentence for them. The reason the Bigfoot stay hidden isn't because they're dangerous. It's because we are. They've watched us for generations. They've seen what we do to things that are different, things we don't understand. They've been hunted, shot at, chased, and killed. They've learned that the safest thing to do is disappear. And they've gotten very, very good at it. The village we found was a masterpiece of camouflage and strategic planning. Every structure positioned for quick evacuation, every trail designed to mislead, every detail calculated to avoid detection. They weren't primitive. They were survivors of a long war they never wanted to fight. And the most heartbreaking part? They're right to hide. Because I've seen what people say online, in forums and social media. I'd shoot one just to prove they exist. I'd mount the head in my living room. I'd sell the body for millions. These aren't fringe opinions. These are common sentiments. People see Bigfoot as a monster, a myth, a trophy, not as a living being with families and feelings and the right to exist. So the Bigfoot stay hidden. They stay in their remote valleys, their concealed villages, their secret refuges. They watch us from the shadows and wait for us to leave, and they teach their children to do the same. That's the terrifying truth, not that monsters are hiding in the woods, but that we've become the monsters they're hiding from. After Jim died, I went back to the valley one more time. I hadn't been there in almost 4 years, and I didn't know what I'd find. Part of me hoped it would be empty, that the tribe had moved on to somewhere even more remote, somewhere safer. The hike was harder than I remembered. I'm not as young as I used to be, and the terrain was rough, but I found the valley, still hidden, still quiet. The village was there, but different. Some of the structures had collapsed, reclaimed by the forest. Others had been maintained, repaired, rebuilt. The fire pit was cold, but the stones were arranged in a new pattern. Someone was still living there. I walked through slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The communal area had new baskets, freshly woven. There were tools I hadn't seen before, more sophisticated than the ones from 2017. They were adapting, evolving, improving their craft. And then I saw something that made me stop. Sitting on a flat rock near the fire pit was the notebook I'd left years ago. And it was weathered, the plastic wrapping cracked, but it was still there. And next to it was something new, a carving. It was made from a piece of cedar, smoothed and polished. The image was simple but clear. 2 figures, one large and one small, standing side by side. One was clearly Bigfoot, the other was human. It was the same image we'd carved into the sign at the valley entrance. They'd seen it, understood it. And this was their response, a reciprocal gesture, acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. I picked up the carving, turned it over in my hands. The craftsmanship was incredible, every detail deliberate. I set it back down carefully, exactly where I'd found it. Then I pulled out a pen and a piece of paper. I wrote a new note, short and simple. Still safe, still secret, always. I placed it under the carving and walked away. As I hiked out of the valley, I heard something behind me, a low, resonant call, rising and falling like a song. I'd heard it once before, years ago, the first time we'd visited. It was a goodbye, or maybe a thank you. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, tears streaming down my face, carrying the weight of everything we'd found and everything we'd chosen to protect. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back since. I don't think I will. The valley belongs to them, not to me. My job isn't to study them or observe them. It's to keep them safe. And the only way to do that is to stay away and keep the secret. So here's what I want people to understand. Bigfoot is real. I know that sounds like the opening line of every conspiracy theory ever written, but it's true. They exist. They live in small tribes in the most remote parts of North America, and they've survived this long because they've stayed hidden. They're not monsters. They're not supernatural. They're just people. Different from us, yes, but people nonetheless. They build homes. They raise families. They create art. They care for each other. and they live in constant fear of us. That's the part that should haunt you. We've created a world where an intelligent species has to hide in the shadows just to survive, where they have to destroy cameras, avoid trails, teach their children to flee at the sound of human voices. We did that. Our ancestors hunted them. We continue to hunt them, even if we call it research or investigation. Every trail camera is a threat. Every expedition is a danger. Every person who goes into the woods looking for proof is a reminder that they're never safe. And the worst part? They know. They're smart enough to understand exactly what we are and what we're capable of. They've watched us for generations. They've seen us cut down forests, build roads, expand our territory without limits. They've seen what we do to animals we consider lesser than us. And they've made the logical choice: stay hidden or die. I think about that a lot, about how terrifying it must be to live that way, to know that your entire existence depends on remaining invisible, to raise your children in hiding, teaching them that the greatest danger in the forest isn't bears or cougars or starvation. It's people. That's what we found in that valley, not a mystery, not a legend, but a truth about ourselves, and a mirror that showed us what we really are, and we didn't like what we saw. So Jim and I made our choice. We chose them over fame, over proof, over recognition. We chose to protect rather than expose. And I'd make the same choice again, every time. The footage is still locked away. The photos are stored on encrypted drives. The location is unmarked on any map. And that's how it's going to stay, because their lives are worth more than our curiosity. Their safety is worth more than our need for answers. And their right to exist in peace is worth more than any proof we could offer. If you're reading this and thinking about going into the woods to look for them, I'm asking you, don't. Leave them alone. Let them live. They've earned that much. I still think about the valley, about the tribe living there, hidden in the trees. Watching the world change around them and hoping they can stay invisible just a little longer. I wonder if they're still there, or if they've moved on to somewhere even more remote. I wonder if the juvenile we saw in the footage is grown now, maybe with children of their own. I wonder if they remember us, if they tell stories about the two rangers who found their village and walked away. I wonder if they know how close they came to being discovered by the world. And I'm grateful every day that we made the choice we did. Jim used to say that some truths are too dangerous to share. I didn't fully understand what he meant until years later. The truth about Bigfoot isn't dangerous because it would shatter our understanding of the natural world. It's dangerous because it would unleash forces the Bigfoot couldn't survive. Hunters, poachers, our governments wanting to study them, corporations wanting to exploit them. Even well-meaning researchers would destroy their way of life by simply documenting it. So the truth stays buried, and the Bigfoot stay hidden. And the world keeps turning, unaware that something incredible is living just beyond the edge of our awareness. That's how it should be. That's how it has to be. Sometimes I'll be out in the woods, even now, far from that valley, and I'll hear something. A branch breaking in a pattern that doesn't match the wind. A call that doesn't sound like any known animal. The feeling of being watched from the tree line. And I'll smile, because I know what's out there. I know why they hide. And I know that as long as people like Jim and me keep the secret, they have a chance. Not a guarantee, just a chance. But that's more than they'd have if the truth came out. So this is my confession, my testimony, my warning. Bigfoot is real. They're hiding because we taught them to. And the most terrifying thing in the forest isn't them. It never was. It's us. It always has been. And until we learn to coexist with things we don't understand, until we learn that some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved, the Bigfoot will keep hiding in their remote villages, raising their families in secret, and hoping that we never find them. I hope they stay hidden. I hope they stay safe. And I hope someday we become the kind of species they don't have to fear. But I'm not holding my breath.